All right, welcome back. Hope you all had a great weekend. Today, we're continuing our review of our latest RBT exam, where we're going through 10 more questions together and breaking them down, how we should think about them on the actual exam. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out rbtexamreview.com. We offer 3 full practice exams, a task list study guide. Combo pack comes with everything and is our best deal. We also have a competency study guide as well. Questions, comments, please let me know. I'd love to help. Let us know when you pass so we can include you in our shout out, what should be coming next week. Other than that, let's keep working hard, keep studying hard, and get to our questions. Question 1. Which of the following behaviors is defined in the most behavior analytic way? Very straightforward question. One of the most basic things an RBT should know, and what you should learn first, really, other than things like functions and basic measurement, is how we define behaviors. Because how we define behaviors drives so much of what we do. If we don't define the behavior correctly, the chances that we measure the correct behavior and measure it consistently and accurately is going to be low. So we really need to define behaviors well. As an RBT, you play a big role in that because it's going to be your job to see the behavior and describe it in a way that makes sense. So if we're going to describe a behavior in a behavior analytic way, what that really means is we're going to be observable and we're going to be measurable. That's what we want. What's observable, what's measurable. That immediately eliminates things like opinions and feelings and blaming it on diagnoses, those kind of things. We only want to define behavior in a way that is observable and measurable. So let's take a look. If you look at A, Joanna's anxiety disorder causes her to avoid asking if she can eat lunch with her peers at school. The issue here is, and what we see a lot, especially from stakeholders, is you blame the lack of skill or the occurrence of a behavior on the actual disability or disorder. We don't do that, right? Because can you really observe and measure anxiety disorders? No, those things are internal. Now we might have more specific behavioral definitions for other behaviors associated with it, but we're never going to say the disorder causes her to avoid asking. Just like you would never say the autism causes so-and-so behavior. So A is wrong. B, whenever Joanna is prompted to ask to eat lunch with a peer, she becomes nervous and avoids engaging in the behavior. All right, this is closer, right? We have an antecedent. Joanna's prompted to eat lunch with a peer, but then she becomes nervous. Ask yourself, can we observe nervous? Can we measure nervous? No, nervous can look a million different ways at any given time, right? If you are coming behind me and I observe and measure nervous, and then you observe and measure nervous, we might observe and measure 2 very different things. B is not specific enough, and it includes nervous, which just is too subjective, not observable, not measurable. C, at lunchtime, Joanna will sit at a different table than her peers when prompted to eat lunch with others. First glance, looks pretty good. When prompted to eat lunch with others, we have our antecedent. Joanna will sit at a different table than her peers. Can we observe and measure Joanna sitting at a different table than her peers? Yeah, easily, right? If you walk into a lunchroom, is Joanna sitting at a different table than peers? Is she not? So far, this is easily the most observable and measurable definition we have. Let's check D. Joanna believes that nobody at school likes her, which leads to her sitting at a different table than her peers at lunch. All right. Believes nobody at school likes her. Beliefs. Why? This might be true, right? She might actually believe this. But a belief can't be observed and it can't be measured consistently. D is not better than C. C is the most observable and most measurable. We can actually see and measure Joanna sitting at a different table compared to her peers. So remember, behavior definitions: observable, measurable. 2, if you wanted to continuously measure inter-response time, which of the following tools would you not use? A couple of different things in our question. We're using continuous measurement. We're using inter-response time. Ask yourself, what is inter-response time? Inter-response time is the time in between 2 responses. What's the key word there? The key word there is time. If we're looking at inter-response time, it's going to be pretty important that we have something that measures time. It doesn't matter if we just count responses here, right? We really need to know the time in between responses. The question is asking, which of the following tools will we not use? So one of these will not be good for inter-response time and continuous measurement. How about a stopwatch? A stopwatch could easily measure the time in between responses. Stopwatch would be perfect for continuous measurement of inter-response time. How about a phone timer? Same idea, right? Probably more convenient today than a stopwatch because we all have phones on us. How about a clock on the wall? Sure. Now that's not as common where we're working, right? But still, you could use theoretically a clock on the wall to measure time in between responses. That leaves us with a partial interval data sheet. So there's many things wrong with this, right? First off, partial interval data is not inter-response time. Partial interval data is not continuous measurement. Why would we use a partial interval data sheet? One, for continuous measurement, and two, for inter-response time. We just wouldn't, right? So even if you weren't sure about A, B, and D, once you read C, you should immediately say, oh, well, partial interval, it's going to be discontinuous. It's not going to be inter-response time. We would definitely not use this for either of those. Our answer here is going to be C. Permanent product measurement would be least appropriate in which of the following scenarios? All right. Once we start reading our questions on the RBT exam and they give us terms, in our heads, we should start defining those terms. So we read permanent product. You need to define it in your head. Oh, well, we're measuring the outcome of behavior or we're measuring the production of the behavior. Now, question becomes easier because now we know what we're looking for, right? If we want to measure that, which is going to be least appropriate, in what scenario would it be least appropriate to use that type of measurement? A, you want to check to see if your son bought all the groceries from the grocery list you gave him. And A, are we measuring the outcome or the product of a behavior? Sure, right? You can come home and see, hey, did you buy the groceries? Did you not? Very clearly, there's a permanent product left behind from his grocery shopping. A is fine. B, you want to measure whether the car wash did a good job cleaning your car. Okay, maybe you walk away while they're cleaning your car. You come back later. Can you tell if they cleaned your car? Sure. Now, good job is subjective, obviously. But at the very least, you can look and scan and see, all right, did they at least clean it, right? So still, B is still an okay measurement of permanent product, even though we would like to be more specific. C, you want to measure how quickly your student took their math test. If I want to measure how quickly my student took their math test, do I need to directly observe that? Yes. Am I measuring the product? Am I measuring how well they did on the math test? No, I'm measuring the act of taking the test, right? We're not worried about the product, and we're worried about a direct observation. If I have to directly observe a behavior, permanent product might not be the best. Because with permanent product, we don't need to actually directly observe the behavior happening. We're only worried about the outcome. And C, we're not worried about the outcome. We're worried about how quickly they're taking that actual test. So far, C is our best answer. What about D? You want to check and see how many orders were placed at the end of the day at your restaurant. Say you're managing a restaurant, maybe it was your day off. So at the end of the day, you log into the computer and you see how many orders were placed. Permanent product, right? Did you need to be there all day at the restaurant? No. The only one where we actually need a true direct observation, right, and where we're not measuring the outcome or the product is going to be C. You want to measure how quickly your student took their math test. Okay, pretty easy question here. How often should session notes be recorded? One of these basic RBT roles or jobs that you need to be aware of and that you need to know. You have to record session notes. At this point in ABA's life cycle, many insurances require session notes. It's always really been a requirement for the RBTs, right? But now it's really a requirement, okay? So how often should you be recording these session notes? Remember, our session notes, we want them objective. We want them objective. We want them clear. We want them complete. You're putting what happened during your session, right? How often should you do that? Well, pretty clearly at the end of each of your session, right? And the reason this particular question might be a little confusing is, let's say you split sessions with somebody, right? Or you have multiple sessions back-to-back days, right? Well, I'll just do all my session notes at the end of the week. Or I'll just do it at the end of the day once the other person's session is over. No, at the end of each session, so we can have the most accurate memory of what that session looked like, you should record your session notes. Not at the end of the day, not at the end of the week, and not only if something major or important occurs during session. Every session, something is going to happen. Whether it's small, big, inconsequential, there is something to report. So how often should session notes be recorded? A, at the end of each session. Before session, Tom picks out 3 different toys for his client. When session starts, Tom gives an SD, observes the client's response, and immediately presents one of the toys. Tom then records whether or not the toy increased the client's future behavior. Tom is conducting a what? Dead giveaway here is what? Tom recording whether or not the toy increased client's future behavior. Because what is Tom doing? Well, Tom brought 3 different toys for his client. So immediately, if I'm reading this question, I'm thinking preference assessment off the bat. And then when session starts, Tom gives the SD, there's a response, and then Tom presents one of the toys. Now, this doesn't seem so much like a preference assessment, but more like a reinforcer assessment, because Tom is delivering the toy as a consequence, right? He's not asking or checking to see, hey, which one of these do you prefer? He's actually delivering the toy as a consequence. He's then checking, does the toy change the behavior? And that's the key difference. A preference assessment, we're not worried about how the stimuli, or in this case, the toy, impacts the behavior. But in a reinforcer assessment, we definitely are. If Tom is actually measuring or observing how behavior is changing, he's not doing a preference assessment, he's doing a reinforcer assessment. Obviously, it's not an indirect assessment because he's directly observing this taking place. And then a forced choice assessment would be a type of preference assessment where Tom would present 2 toys at the same time. Not happening right. Tom is conducting simply a reinforcer assessment. You've worked with a client for 8 months. Today, that client mastered several targets that were on a VR4 schedule. If you're going to start teaching new skills, what would the ideal reinforcement schedule be? Okay. The reason this question could be tricky is the part about the client already mastering several targets on a VR4 schedule. So what do we know? Well, we know the client is capable of learning, right? We know the client can handle a pretty thin schedule, a variable ratio 4 schedule, which is pretty good. But now we want to start teaching brand new skills. And ideally, when we're teaching brand new skills, what type of reinforcement system are we looking at? Are we just going to reuse the reinforcement schedule they had before? Are we going to use a VR4? Well, no, because if the client mastered those targets, you can probably assume they were learning them, they were strengthened already, and they're at the very end. If we're teaching a brand new skill, we don't want a VR4. Why? Because when we're teaching a new skill, we want that skill, when it's evoked, to contact a lot of reinforcement. So really, ideally, we would want an FR1, because an FR1 is the best ideal reinforcement schedule for teaching new skills. Now, of course, everything is individualized. I get that. But on the exam, when they ask you a specific question, like what is the ideal reinforcement, be specific. Ideally, when you're teaching a new skill, you want to use an FR1. A VR1 is a little better than VR4, but it's still not as good as FR1. And then intermittent is not FR1, because FR1 is what? FR1 is continuous, and intermittent, 2 different things. So if we're going to start teaching brand new skills, ideally, we're going to use an FR1 schedule. That way, every time the skill is evoked or demonstrated, we can deliver reinforcement. Crystal knows that her client is highly reinforced by trips to the park. The client will go to the park 2 or 3 times a day. If Crystal wants to use the park as a reinforcer, what type of modification could be made to potentially improve the effectiveness of the park as a reinforcer? Okay, a mouthful, right? A lot of bigger words, right? Maybe more technical words, maybe a harder question. Well, let's just break it down, okay? What do we want to happen? We want a modification that's going to improve the effectiveness of the park as a reinforcer. So we already know the park is reinforcing, and we want to make it even more reinforcing. We want it to be a big reinforcer, right, for our sessions. Crystal knows, right, it's already a reinforcer. And right now, the client goes to the park 2 or 3 times a day. If Crystal wants to use the park, what would she do? What can she possibly do? Remember, this is a good example of only using the information given, because you could very easily start making assumptions or creating facts that aren't there. But if we just use the information given, all we know is they're highly reinforced and they go to the park 2 or 3 times a day. All we could do, right, is change this part about going to the park 2 or 2 times a day. We don't have any other information. So if Crystal wants to use the park as a reinforcer, what should she do? Should she allow the client unlimited access to the park? Well, no, because what happens when you get overexposed to reinforcers? You satiate, right? You get too much of it, they become less valuable. That's what typically occurs, okay? Allowing the client unlimited access is going to potentially decrease the value. We want to increase the value. B, only allow the client to go to the park if they complete their homework. Well, we're not using it yet as a contingency, right? We're not making this contingent. Okay, we want to use it, but we want to make it improved as a reinforcer. Okay, so B is kind of jumping the gun a little bit. C, prevent the client from going to park on days the client doesn't receive services. Yes, just like allowing unlimited access would lead to satiation, preventing the client would lead to deprivation, which would therefore increase the value of the park. A little motivating operation talk there, right? So if Crystal wants to use the park as a reinforcer, well, withhold it until Crystal gets there, offer it, and now the park is highly reinforcing. And then D, teach the client to appropriately request a trip to the park. That might make it worse, right? If the client can appropriately request, the response requirement to get to the park might be too high, might decrease in value. D is just not a very good answer. If Crystal wants to use the park as a reinforcer, she could prevent the client from going to the park on days the client doesn't receive services, leading to deprivation, leading to an increase in value of the park. Our ultimate goal when teaching a skill or reducing a behavior should be what? So whenever you hear final goal, ultimate goal, what is our priority, right? We need to start thinking one thing, and that's generalization. Everything we do, whenever we reduce a behavior, we teach a skill, and we're in this clinic environment, or we're in this home environment, this controlled environment, what we need to be thinking about is what happens when this learner leaves our controlled environment? Are they still going to be able to do the skill? Will that behavior still be decreased? If not, we're not generalizing and we're not being effective. So now that's what we're going to look for when we look at our answer choices. A, we want the client to be able to perform the skill consistently wherever services are delivered. Sure, right? Wherever services are delivered, we want them to perform the skill consistently. That is a given. But is that really our ultimate goal? Because again, who cares if they can do them when services are delivered if they can't do them outside of services? That's what's really important. B, if reducing a behavior, we never want the behavior to occur again. That's just unrealistic. When we set goals, we need to be realistic. Think about your own personal, quote unquote, bad behavior. You might go weeks without engaging in behavior you don't like, but occasionally it's going to happen. Why? Because we're human. We're not perfect. Reducing behavior, our goal is not never occur again. It's unrealistic. C, we want the client to generalize the changes that are made. Yes, very easy, very obvious, right? Ultimate goal, generalize, generalize, generalize. If we're not working on generalizing, if we're not teaching generalization, we're doing a disservice to our clients. When discussing a client or evaluating their treatment plan, who should be involved in the decision-making? Who is part of the team? Who do we collaborate with? Obviously, as an RBT, your supervisor is going to be the lead. They're going to be creating treatment plans. They're going to be training you, but you will be involved in that in a big way. If you're not, that's an issue. Okay. You know the client oftentimes better than the supervisor does because you're around them all the time. So our supervisors are given. Do we stop at A and move on? Well, no, because there are other people on the team, right? What about supervisor and the client? Should the client be involved in evaluating their own treatment plan? Absolutely, right? The client should absolutely, it's their life, it's their treatment, right? They should be involved in the decision-making to a point that they're capable. And that's key to remember as well, right? We want to be fair, but we also have to maintain integrity of our treatment. So what about your supervisor and the stakeholders? Again, sure, stakeholders like parents, teachers, people who are invested in the client should absolutely have a say. But what does C leave out? C leaves out the client. So we need to go to D, supervisor, stakeholders, and the client. Long way around it, right, to get to D, because now we have all the answers we need. But sometimes on the exam, it's going to be like that, where you need to read each answer choice, work your way down to D. That's why you should always, always, always read every answer choice. Never pick an answer and move on without doing that, okay? It's going to burn you, right? Let's not miss easy questions because we're rushing. And then finally, if the behavior plan for your client listed antecedent strategies for managing behavior, those strategies would most likely focus on what? All right, antecedent strategies. What are antecedent strategies? When do they occur? Antecedent strategies occur before behavior happens. Are antecedent strategies preventative or reactive? They're preventative because they're happening before the behavior. We can't respond to the behavior with an antecedent strategy. Okay. We're trying to prevent something from happening, right? We're changing something in the environment to prevent a behavior from happening. So that being said, these strategies would most likely focus on what? A, how you should react to a behavior occurring. Keyword, react. When we talk about reacting, what are we talking about? Talking about consequence. B, what type of reinforcement you should be using. Again, reinforcement, we're talking about consequence. C, how you should change the environment to prevent the behavior from happening. There we go, right? Antecedent strategies are preventative. Consequence strategies are reactive. We're doing antecedents. We want to prevent. Finally, D, when to withhold reinforcement from a client. Again, consequence strategy. The only antecedent strategy here is going to be C, how you should change the environment to prevent behavior from happening. Okay, thanks for watching. Please check out rbtexamreview.com for all of our study materials. Questions, comments, please let me know. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.